So about 20 years ago, I found the field of bioethics, which is a field that asks philosophers, along with lawyers, public policy folk, medicine, nursing, medical anthropology, to come together to look at some of the most challenging moral issues and policy issues that our generation faces. Well, what do I mean by bioethics? So one of the ways I think about it is sort of what angels wouldn't have. So if you think about it, if there are angels, they're incorporeal, immortal. I don't know, I'm sure maybe they have incredible ethical conundra, trying to figure out their answers to moral questions. But it's not bioethics. So bioethics looks at ethical issues that arise in virtue of our biological nature, in virtue of the fact that we are embodied and not just minds, and that we have the kinds of bodies, that we are this kind of animal. It's a field that started in the United States back in the 1970s. And cast your mind back to history, this was a time of the civil rights movement, the time of the women's movement, when groups of people came forward with new voices to assert that they had rights that weren't being respected. And at just this time, another group came along and said, we're patients, or we're clinical research participants, and we have certain fundamental rights of autonomy that are not being respected. So some of this was due to, incredible abuses, to be honest, in clinical research. So the Tuskegee experiments, where members of the United States Public Health Service actually enrolled black poor men who had syphilis, told them they were treating them, and then intentionally withheld treatment, even after it was discovered, so that they could chart the course of the disease. Patients who would arrive ill and vulnerable, dealing with a physician who, out of beneficence, right, a desire to do good for the patient, would withhold information about a diagnosis. So you wouldn't know that you were actually dying and able to share that with your loved ones and make final plans because the doctor was afraid that that information would be too distressing. Or you would have surgery done to you, far more extensive than you might have understood at the time. For instance, a surgery with a cesarean if you were giving birth, and it turns out they just decided it was time for a hysterectomy too, because you already had 4 kids. Okay, so some very fundamental sort of abuses. It gave rise then to a conversation that again brought together philosophers, lawyers, humanities folks, and medicine and nursing. Arguing that paternalism, the idea that doctors know best or researchers know best because they're benevolent, that might not be really the right model. For a couple of reasons. One is, what is best for you is actually not just a function of medical knowledge, it's also what you value, right? With the chemotherapy, are you more interested, if you face a difficult diagnosis, having aggressive chemo so that you have lower quality of life but longer quantity, or vice versa? Not surprisingly, people differ, so you might want to ask. And second, even if the physicians did know exactly what was best for you, if they're going to intervene on this body, if they're going to cut it open for surgery or hook it up to a machine, that is the sort of decision that should be yours. That should belong to the person who lives in that body, even if it's a terrible decision, right? So even if the doctor were right, you should have had the surgery, at the end of the day, it's your decision to make. An appellate court in the United States reached a landmark decision that said, surgery on your body, even if it's in your best interests, relative even to your values, without your informed consent, is battery, a crime. You have to make the decision, not the doctor. So bioethics was born in the 70s in this crucible of patients' rights and the rights of those participating in research. It's also evolved in an incredibly rich way. So a second topic that bioethics has turned to has to do with fundamental issues about the environment. So, as we begin to learn that what humans have done, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, have led to profound challenges for the survival of the planet, not that the stakes are very high. Right? It is the moral issue of our generation. And the issue isn't just what can we do scientifically, what can we do politically. There are also bioethical issues, namely issues about environmental justice. One issue, who bears the burden of pollution where it happens? Okay, spoiler alert, it's not the well-resourced and the rich. Here's a third topic that bioethics looks at. The fast-paced, crazy, amazing world of biotechnology. So any of you who study science likely have encountered some of the really cool stuff we can do and stuff that's on the horizon. How about growing human organs inside of pigs? I mean, after all, there's a huge organ shortage, right? People are dying waiting for a kidney or a liver or a pancreas, right? Huge worldwide crisis, also yielding black market sales of organs, another bioethical issue. Some researchers have recently accomplished the following. So they took a pig that was a white pig. And while it was an embryo, they switched off the gene that's responsible for developing the pancreas in the pig embryo, okay? Switched it off. They then inserted stem cells from a black pig into that embryo and let it grow. And what was born was a really cute little piglet that was a white pig through and through, except with a black pig pancreas. So researchers are wondering, we could do the same thing if we inserted human stem cells, right, after turning off the pancreas or the liver or the kidney. But bioethics also wants to ask a different question. Do we want to start mixing and matching in this way? So these animals are called chimeras, which is simply a biological creature that has genetic material from two different individuals. It actually occurs naturally under that description. Sometimes early non-identical twin zygotes, sometimes in early pregnancy, fuse together. Isn't that weird? And you'll get a baby, a human baby born with parts that are comprised of different genomes. But we're talking about chimeras in the more ambitious sense of actually doing a mashup between two different species. So what should we think? How about transplanting human brain cells into great apes so we can finally talk more? So as you can see, the world of bioethics is a rich and broad one. And some of the issues really are dealing with things that are moving very quickly. But let's return to that first issue I mentioned, that kind of founding question for bioethics. The issue about how patients and physicians or nurses should understand their relationship, one of paternalism or something else. That's a question that isn't about technology. That's a question that's born of a fundamental existential fact about us and the fact that we're not angels, that we get sick, that we die, that we need other people's help and expertise, that when we are vulnerable to illness, we have to present ourselves to a provider who belongs to a profession, which comes from professing, which is to make an oath to act in the best interests of you and not her. But how much is it fair to ask of that doctor? Here's a sobering fact for those of you who live in the United States. Less than half of American physicians would recommend the career to their children. They worry that we have so far swung away from paternalism, which was a very problematic model, way over to a sort of consumer model of medicine, where the patient is now a client and the doctor or nurse is a provider, and we want to optimize productivity. Where optimizing productivity is measured in things like, how much of the surgical theater is used and how many of the beds are taken as opposed to what patients and providers describe as the most meaningful, both humanly and in healing terms, which is having an interaction in human terms. So bioethics ranges from almost sci-fi issues all the way back to issues that are as old as the human condition themselves, and all tracing back to the fact that we are embodied creatures who need one another, face illness, give birth, manipulate our environment, explore new answers, change ourselves, change the world, and the ethical issues that arise from it. Thank you.